Every night at exactly 2 a.m., someone knocks on my front door, but when I answer it, there's no one there. I never would have believed it myself if it wasn't happening to me right now. He lives in this huge mansion on the outskirts of town. As we were walking through the house, Rob kept telling me stories about how he and his siblings used to play hide-and-seek, and how they would always find the scariest places to hide. He said that the guest room at the end of the hallway was his favorite place to hide by. It has a big front yard with a long driveway and a security system that includes cameras and motion sensors. They were small and barely noticeable, but they definitely weren't there the day before. I shrugged it off and figured that maybe Rob had gotten them there when he came over to grab his stuff. We then went outside to check on the lawn and the pool. At first I thought it was just the pipes, but then I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. I got a weird feeling, but I tried to shake it off. I told myself that Rob had probably forgotten to mention that someone was coming over to do maintenance or something. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I realized that it was getting louder. The whispers were getting clearer. I could hear them getting closer. I froze. These prints were identical to the ones from the day before. I could tell that whoever had made them had worn the same shoes both days. In the morning, I called him to tell him about the footprints and the knocking. He laughed and told me that there must have been some kids playing around. He said that there were no signs of forced entry and that nothing had been stolen. And while we were doing that, Rob kept telling me to be careful and to lock all the doors and windows. Whenever I was inside, I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my keys and ran outside. As I was driving away, I looked back at the house and I could have sworn that I saw a dark figure standing on the porch. At first it was hesitant, but then it became more aggressive. I couldn't believe that someone would be brave enough to break into Rob's house, especially during the day. So I did, but as the hours passed, I started to feel uneasy again. The phone rang, startling me. It was Rob. I wanted to see if I could catch whoever was making the footprint. I waited and waited, but no one ever showed up. I told him that I'd seen another pair of footprints, and that I was starting to get scared. Peesh told me to pack my things and get out of the house. He said that he would come home early and we could figure things out then. I ran and hid in the closet, holding my breath and trying not to make a sound. And every morning I would find new footprints on the porch. The knocking continued for a few minutes, but then it slowly came to a halt. He was furious when he saw the state of the house. There was dirt and footprints everywhere. He checked the security footage, but it was all static. The hard drive had been fried somehow. Knocking, knocking, knocking. The sound was coming from the front door. And the most terrifying part is that I still hear the knocking every night, even though I don't live there anymore. I slowly approached it and peeked outside. No one was there. I told myself that it was probably just some kids playing around. But as the sun began to set, I started to feel uneasy again. I locked all the doors and windows and tried to distract myself by watching some TV. I took a deep breath and closed the door. still trying to calm my heartbeat. He said that even though the neighborhood is really quiet, people tend to target homes that are empty for a week or two. I knew that Rob would come home that night, but I didn't want to scare him by telling him about what I'd experienced, so I decided to keep it to myself. Bye. The house is also pretty old, and some of the rooms are boarded up because they have been used in years. There weren't many cars driving past, and there wasn't a single person walking. My phone was almost dead, so I plugged it in before going to bed. I woke up the next morning to birds chirping and the sun shining right in my face. I stretched and yawned and thought how nice it was to actually wake up feeling rested. I thought maybe everyone was inside watching TV or something. So I shrugged it off and headed inside to start unpacking. It all started when my best friend Rob asked me to house sit while he went on vacation with his family. The day before Rob left, he stopped by to get some things, and we decided to do a walkthrough of the house just to make sure everything was okay. When I told him that I was going to be staying in that room, he gave me a weird look and quickly changed the subject. As soon as his car drove away, I noticed how silent the street was. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing and getting comfortable, and by the next evening, it already felt like I was living in the house. I got out of bed and walked over to the window. That's when I noticed a pair of muddy footprints on the welcome mat. About an hour later, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway. After all, I had even heard anything in the house since Rob and his family moved in about 10 years ago. I started to hear knocking. My heart started racing, and my hands were shaking. When I finally came out of the closet, I noticed that the door was slightly open. As the day went on, I started to feel a little bit better. But as I was watching, I started to hear what sounded like whispering coming from the vents. Then I started hearing footsteps in the hallway again, just like the day before. My blood ran cold. What was happening? I walked out of the living room and into the hallway. That's when I saw another pair of muddy footprints on the floor. I turned around and ran back to the living room. I spent the night at a hotel, too afraid to go back to Rob's house. He suggested that I go back to the house and stay there until he got back. He asked if everything was okay and if I'd seen anything suspicious. That night, I found somewhere else to stay. Every night after that, I heard the same thing. Knocking, whispering, footsteps. One morning, I got up early and went to the front door. A week later, Rob came home. To this day, we have no idea who was visiting us in the middle of the night. Today, we have a creepypasta titled "I Can See You" by an anonymous user. It goes like this. I picked it up and turned it over. It was a text from an unknown number. I showed it to my boyfriend, who just grunted, rolled over, and went back to sleep. I read the message out loud. I can see you through the window. My boyfriend groaned and turned away from me. "What the hell was that?" I cried. "I don't know," he said, his voice trembling. "But whatever it is, it's gone," he added, trying to sound reassuring. We lay in silence for what felt like hours. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. My eyes were wide with fear. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. What was that noise? Well, I was trying to get in through the window. Every time the phone vibrated, I jumped. Every time a car drove past, I flinched. I paced the floor, unable to relax. Then the phone vibrated again. I picked it up and looked at the screen. It was the same unknown number. This time the message read, "Let me in." I screamed and dropped the phone. My boyfriend came running into the bedroom, his face pale. Sometimes at night I wake up and I swear I can hear scratching at my window. Sometimes I wake up and I think I can see a pair of eyes gleaming in the darkness. Sometimes I wake up and I think I can hear a voice whispering, "Let me in." "What's wrong?" he asked. I pointed at the phone. "Look," I whispered. He picked it up and read the message. "Let me in," he said, his voice trembling. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know," he replied. "I don't know," he added, his eyes wide with fear. I thought, maybe it was just a branch or something. "Let's get out of here," my boyfriend said, grabbing my hand. We ran out of the bedroom and down the stairs. Bye. We sat on a nearby bench and tried to calm down. We called a taxi and headed back home. When we arrived, the police were waiting for us. We explained what had happened, and they searched the house, but found nothing. "There's nothing we can do," the officer said. "If whoever was out there wants to come back, then so be it." With that, he left. We didn't stop to grab our phones or any of our belongings. We just kept running. We burst through the front door and into the night. We didn't know where we were going, but we didn't care. We just wanted to get away from that house. But then why did it stop when my boyfriend came to the window? And why did it start again when he left? It was dark and empty. We could hear the wind whistling through the trees and the rain pounding on the roof. There was no sign of the figure that had been watching us. Had it followed us? I didn't want to find out. We turned and ran in the opposite direction. We didn't stop until we reached a brightly lit convenience store. Was someone out there watching us? I shook my head and tried to push the thoughts away. It was probably nothing, I told myself as I walked out of the bathroom. Then we heard a third noise, a scraping sound, as if something was trying to get in through the window. My boyfriend and I screamed at the top of our lungs. We clung to each other as the noise continued outside. Finally, it stopped. I put the phone down and tried to go back to sleep, but the message kept running through my head. He pulled the curtain aside and peered out into the darkness. "It's gone," he said, returning to bed. Every time the phone vibrated, I jumped. Every time the doorbell rang, I hid. Every time a leaf fell outside, I cowered. I was a mess. As the evening drew on, my fear began to turn into anger. Who was out there? Who was trying to break into our house and spy on us? I decided I needed answers. I went to the window and pulled back the curtains. Outside was a large oak tree. Its branches scraped against the glass. I stepped back. That must have been the noise, I thought. Then I remembered the text message. I can see you through the window way. Could someone have been hiding in the tree? Had they used the tree to spy on us? What did they want? I shook my head, dismissing the thought. It was probably just a prank. Someone had seen our lights on at night and decided to mess with us, but who and why? Whatever it is, it's gone, he added. But I wasn't convinced. I could feel something watching us from outside. I tried to convince myself that it had gone, but I just couldn't shake this feeling. The adrenaline started to fade, and I began to get really scared. My boyfriend cuddled me close and rocked me gently until I fell asleep. It was 3:34 a.m. The only light in the room came from the faint glow of the street lights outside, which shone through the gaps in the curtains. There were no lights on downstairs, and the front door was locked. I was lying in bed next to my boyfriend, who was fast asleep, when my phone vibrated on the bedside table. An hour passed, and I could feel myself getting tense. Every time I tried to relax, I'd remember the message and jump. He must be joking, I muttered. I looked away and walked back to bed. My boyfriend was still asleep. I crawled underneath the covers and pulled them all the way up. I snuggled against my boyfriend's warm body and closed my eyes. I knew he would protect me if anything was out there. Suddenly, there was a loud bang at the window by. I jumped and buried my face in my pillow. I could feel my heart beating in my ears. My boyfriend stirred and wrapped his arm around me. "What was that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking. B pulled me closer and stroked my hair until I calmed down. Then my phone vibrated again. I grabbed it from the bedside table and looked at the screen. "Do you see me?" I called out to my boyfriend, who was still fast asleep. I didn't want to wake him, so instead I crept out of bed and walked over to the window. I pulled the curtain back a few inches and peered out into the darkness. I couldn't see anyone by. Then I noticed a pair of eyes gleaming in the distance. They were definitely there, watching us. I quickly pulled the curtain shut and backed away. I wanted to tell my boyfriend, but I didn't want to wake him up. But then the phone vibrated again. "Come on," I hissed. I opened the curtain slightly and looked out again. The eyes were still there. Boom. A moment later, there was another loud bang, followed by several sharp knocks. I screamed and buried my face in my hands. My boyfriend shot upright in bed. My boyfriend got out of bed and cautiously approached the window. The next morning, after, of course, not sleeping at all, I got up and went to the bathroom. I spent the day at home, too scared to go out. As the night wore on, I became increasingly agitated. We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the wind howling outside. Then we heard a loud crash. We both jumped and stared at each other. We ran for what felt like hours until we finally stopped and turned around to look back at the house. Shaking and sobbing, we went inside and bought some water and snacks. My boyfriend and I haven't been back to that house since. I'm too scared. Every night he would stand in our yard and smile at our bedroom window. And one night, I actually saw him. It all started when my son Riley came running into my room one night. He was only 5 years old, and he had this blank, scared look on his face. "Mum, you have to see this," he said, grabbing my hand and pulling me out of bed. P led me to his window and pointed down into our front yard. But I didn't. One night as I watched, though, I felt a cold spot of air on my neck. I looked away from the window and over at Riley. He was fast asleep, breathing softly and calmly. "It's just your imagination," I whispered. Then I looked back at the window, and that's when I saw him. Suddenly, I heard a crash. I looked over at Riley. He was still fast asleep. So I got out of bed and crept over to his window. The police car was parked in our driveway, and the officer stood beside it talking to someone. They both turned as I approached, and I saw a young female officer. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to wake you, but we got a call from a neighbor saying they saw someone breaking into your car," she said. I didn't think anything of it. I replied. I know the window was unlocked, and I thought maybe Riley and Cloud sneak out and chase him. Bye. I looked toward the road the officer had come from, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Do you know where he went?" I asked. No, ma'am. We haven't seen him since we arrived," she said. Then she looked past me at the house. "So, what's the name of your son?" Again. I hesitated. "Why do you want to know?" I asked suspiciously. "Oh, no reason," she said quickly. "It's just that our records show that we've had several missing persons. REPORTS filed for a little boy matching your son's description. All of them happened within a mile of your house." She paused and looked down at her feet. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I really think you should let us come inside and ask some questions about your son." I stared at her for a moment. Then, suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "I don't feel well." The officer's face paled. "Ma'am, please don't get sick. We really need to talk to you," she said frantically. I stumbled back toward the house. "The front door," I croaked. "It's unlocked." Then I collapsed onto the floor, and everything went black. I pushed aside the curtains and looked out. Someone was standing on our lawn, but it wasn't the man. It was the police officer from earlier. I was lying on the floor in my son's room. The sun was shining in through the window, and Riley was standing there looking down at me. He asked, "Mum, are you okay?" I nodded and sat up. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little dizzy." "What happened?" "You passed out on the floor after you told me to go to sleep. So I ran and got the police." "They're downstairs asking you questions," he said. I got out of bed and ran to the window. The police car was gone, but standing on our lawn was the man. He was smiling at me. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He took a step forward and tapped the glass with his finger. He looked up at me and smiled, then mouthed the words, "It's okay." I frowned, confused, and then he turned and walked away. I called out to him, "Hey, what are you doing here? What's going on?" He didn't respond. He just kept walking. I looked, but I didn't see anything. "What is it, honey?" I asked. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes were like two black holes in his head. When morning came, I got up and went to the window. Standing out there in the morning light was the man. I screamed and ran from the room. I didn't want to believe what I had seen, so I didn't even bother checking the security footage. What good would that do? Who would believe a crazed mother who said her son, his imaginary friend, was coming to visit at night? He was tall and thin, and he wore a long trench coat that reached his ankles. He didn't understand why I was moving him, but he didn't protest when I told him I wanted him to start sleeping in my room. At least now I could keep watch for the man while he slept. That night, I lay in the middle of the floor next to his bed, watching him. Again, I felt a draft of cold air on my neck, and I heard a soft tap on the glass. I knew who was out there. He raised his hand and slowly began tapping on the glass. I screamed and threw myself away from the window. When I looked back, he was gone. I didn't want to check outside because I was afraid to see him again. Riley shook his head, still staring at the window. "There's a man standing out there, Mom. He's been there every night." I tried to reason with him. "It's just your imagination, sweetie. There's no man there." But he insisted that there was, and he wanted me to call the police. I ended up calling the cops just to check it out. It was probably nothing, but if there was some pervert lurking around our house, I wanted him caught. When the officer arrived, he walked around the outside of the house with us, but we didn't see anyone. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm not seeing anything out here," the policeman said. Every single night before bed, he would come running into my room, eyes wide with terror, insisting that the man was out there again. I tried everything to get him to stop fixating on the man, but nothing worked. He wouldn't go to sleep unless I sat with him and turned the lights off while he slept. So I did. For weeks, I stayed in Riley's room every night, watching him sleep. I was exhausted. My eyes were droopy, and it was hard to stay awake. But I couldn't let Riley sleep alone. He was too scared. If you could describe what you've seen, I might be able to do something about it. Riley tried to explain, but all that came out was a jumble of words. The cop looked at him and smiled. "Hey, listen, why don't you come back inside and let your mom get you some milk, or maybe a cookie? Huh. We'll be right here if anything happens." "Okay." Riley nodded and went back to his room. The cop looked at me and shook his head. "Sorry, lady, but I'm not seeing any evidence of any crime here. If anything does happen, though, just give us a call." "Okay." Then he left. Riley became obsessed with the man after that. During those nights, I would stare into the darkness outside of the window, half expecting to see a dark figure standing in the yard. Peeve, who was standing right outside the window, looking in at Riley with a big, crooked grin. Bye. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor next to Riley's bed, holding his hand. That day I took Riley to a different room in the house. As the hours passed, the tapping grew louder. I got dressed and went downstairs to find the front door unlocked. I walked outside and onto our lawn. When I woke up,